He's an insane source on so many things legal, and we've got a lot of questions for him. David Katz, welcome, sir.
Great to be with you, Mark. Assistant United States Attorney.
What did I say? Not that.
District Attorney.
I said assistant.
Attorney. That's in state court. In United States District Court, you're an assistant United States Attorney. So,
okay, so assistant U.S. District Attorney. Yeah, I usually get it right, but I think I screwed it up because I'm, frankly, because I'm a moron. All right. Yeah, I'm barely, I'm just.
You do not know what you are talking about.
Exactly. There's that. Okay. Now, David Katz, so much to ask you about. I'd love for you to take it where you want to take it a little bit because our time is limited now. But I saw that, for example, Rupert Murdoch is being deposed right now while we're speaking, most likely, in the Dominion defamation case, that Dominion voting machine case. That's a $1.6 billion suit. I was just going to ask you briefly, is that a suit? It seems to me like there are real damages, provable damages there, and isn't that what you need to prove in a suit like this?
Yes, those are real damages that could really harm Fox, that Fox would have to pay upwards of $1 billion. And, they picked on somebody their own size. They picked on Dominion, and they diminished Dominion's business prospects. They said that their vote counting system was skewed. It was irregular. It didn't work. That when you voted for Trump, it cast a ballot for Biden. Of course, the irony was that all the senators and representatives and governors who won Republican races didn't seem to skew the vote for any of them. It didn't seem to cast any votes for their rival, only for Trump. And the reality was that Trump performed about 5 or 6 percentage points worse than, let's say, the fellow running for governor in Georgia and people running in other states. He just was a failed candidate. He was a loser. People didn't like him. They thought he'd been a terrible president. They thought he'd mismanaged the pandemic. But Fox put a lot of the blame on this Dominion system, and they defamed them in the opinion of Dominion and an awful lot of people. And as I say, Dominion was a big boy who could hire very good lawyers and could pursue the lawsuit, could take depositions. The average person tries to fight Fox. They get ground down. Our federal courts are supposed to stand up for the little guy. But a lot of times, those of us who practice in the federal courts a lot kind of roll our eyes as we see decision after decision for the big guy, for the government, and for the big corporation. But this was another big corporation that could take on Fox. And they've taken the depositions now, Mark, of, Sean Hannity, other presenters like that. Hannity said, I didn't believe a word of it. But it was news because the president was ballyhooing it. The president was trumpeting it, ex-president. And so we reported it every day, breathlessly, just because the president was making a big deal of it. But I didn't believe it, Sean Hannity said. All this kind of testimony and evidence is very bad for Fox. A lot of people thought Fox would settle. But, of course, one of the problems is that for Dominion, it's really its reputation. It's its sales. It tries to get hired in different countries, to do the elections there. It could be Brazil. It could be Indonesia. And if you have worldwide bad publicity from Fox, it hurts you. And that's what they're saying. They were defamed, and it hurt them. So we'll see how that one comes out.
Yeah, I think that you stated so starkly and correctly when you suggest, hey, this is their business. And I made the point at the time that they're in the business of vote counting. And the more you put a stink on them, Fox News Channel, the more you impair their ability to be a worldwide provider of these systems that can count votes. So you stated so well. I wanted to also mention to you, there was a decision. It was one of those emergency applications that was presented to the Supreme Court on guns. It's in the state of New York. And
yes.
I wonder if you could speak to what happened, because they were.
Sure.
This is a court that was ruling against, in this case, the firearms dealers in New York.
Well, this is the New York State pistol case. This is the one that went up, I think it was last term. Last term was kind of dominated by getting rid of the precedent that all of those aspirants to the Supreme Court, like Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, said they would stand by. Then they didn't stand by it. We had Dobbs. They overruled Roe v. Wade. I mean, it was cataclysmic. So it was easy to get lost in the fact that there was another very bad, I believe, wrongly decided case, this New York State pistol. Now, there have been some cases like Heller, Mark, that said that you can keep arms at home, whether you agree with this interpretation of the Second Amendment or not. And the U.S. Supreme Court did not for 150 years. But all of a sudden, with Scalia and a few others, they ruled that the Second Amendment gives you a right to keep arms at home. Whether you have the right to go bear arms on the street, that was the one they kind of decided in New York State pistol and said, yes, you have a right to bear arms. You have a right to carry. And there's only certain restrictions that the state can put on it. So after that was decided for New York and people said, oh, that'll be great. Everyone's going to have a gun on their way home from work and stop in a bar. People are going to run around Yankee Stadium with guns. Are you kidding me? So they said, well, there are going to be some places where you can't have guns. But in general, yes, you have the right to bear arms as well as keep them at home for self-defense. But it depends, of course, what the states do in the future. So what New York State did in the future was to pass very restrictive gun laws. So a gun dealer just ran up to the U.S. Supreme Court after losing in all the courts below and said to the Supreme Court, do something about it. New York passed some very restrictive gun laws. You said they couldn't be that restrictive, and New York tried to be very sly and passed some very restrictive ones. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, at least for right now, we're not going to issue a stay. At least for now, we're going to keep the very restrictive new New York gun laws in effect, and we're going to let them go into effect at this time. So there are things like you can't go into a gun store at all if you're under 18. I mean, you're blocked like you're carded, like you would be in a bar, but a serious carding, you're not even allowed in the store. You can't buy one if you're over 21. There's all kinds of other restrictions. Obviously, the old restrictions, you can't have a felony, that kind of thing. So that was the case that just went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Doesn't necessarily mean that much. This is the so-called shadow docket, where they decide these cases on an emergency basis. They don't issue an opinion, and it's kind of hard to know sometimes what to make of them. They're much more, what's the word I want to use, flamboyant. They're much more notorious when the shadow docket actually produces a stay that matters, when they didn't stay, for instance, that 6-week abortion law before the Dobbs case, that vigilante 6-week abortion law down in wherever it was, Texas or something.
In Texas, right.
When they did not stay that shadow docket was like, oh my God. This one was dramatic because, my God, if they'd have stopped that, you know that the Supreme Court is really on this war path to allow guns everywhere. But it's very, very scary. It's really scary. All the open carry thing. It's scary when they show up at these meetings and you're debating something and, 7 people who look like Proud Boys or are Proud Boys show up armed to the teeth and intimidate people. So it is very intimidating, these people running around with open carry. But at least in this case, Mark, it was okay. By the way, if we're going to talk about guns, I'm ready on Alec Baldwin, too.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much because I wanted to get to that, and I also want to get to the expungement of Donald Trump's charges or the impeachment thing. So we'll get to that. So I'm going to put it to the side for the moment, and now let's get to Baldwin. So he's been charged with involuntary manslaughter, along with a prop master there on the set who's been charged with same. Speak to this case and how it could be made against him and where the high ground is for him, if you would, please.
Well, you may say this is the criminal defense lawyer in me because after being a federal prosecutor, I have been a criminal defense attorney, and that's what I do for a living. And I haven't had anybody quite in Alec Baldwin's situation, although I did see him with his young wife and baby around Beverly Hills. And, of course, I saw him on 30 Rock, and I saw him play Trump on Saturday Night Live like everyone else. I'm trying to be as objective as I can, and I don't see how the state of New Mexico is ever going to prove this case against him beyond a reasonable doubt. That's still the standard in a criminal case. And when people say, how come Trump hasn't been charged with this or that or the other thing, I always remind them, whether I'm on with Pat Thurston or you or whoever, that, they have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt to the satisfaction of all 12 jurors. And that's why I think that Baldwin will not be convicted of this. Somebody yelled out, the person who's in a position to know, it's a cold gun. He was told it was a cold gun. He had an armorer. The armorer was also charged with 2 counts. But the armorer's job is to make sure that there's no live ammunition in it. He had no reason to think the armorer hadn't done her job. The person who supplied guns to the site said that he never supplied any live ammunition. So some people are thinking, well, if there was live ammunition on the set, and we know now that there was, of course, the round that killed her, the cinematographer. There's the round that wounded the other person. That might have been the same round, but in any event, there was one in his not his holster, but the band around him that he carries, playing a gunslinger in this Western movie that he was making Rust. And there were also some on trays around there. So some people thought, because it was a very unhappy set and people had walked off, some people have even speculated it might have been sabotage. Somebody put live ammunition around there. But Baldwin would have no idea of that. Baldwin has no reason to think there's any live ammunition on the set at all. Someone's yelled out it's a cold gun, who's in a position to know that. That person has since taken some plea deal. And you can see why anybody would be tempted to take a plea deal. They just charged Baldwin with 2 counts. One carries a mandatory 5 years in prison. Now, this is involuntary manslaughter. This is a tragedy. Everyone agrees it was a tragedy. He never, ever would have wanted anything bad to happen. And yet they're about to charge him. They did just charge him with a 5-year mandatory count. This is the kind of pressure that some prosecutors put on people. And, people sometimes ask me, like cocktail parties and stuff, how is it that people who really didn't do anything wrong take the plea deal? I would never do that. And I said, really? If you were charged with a 5-year mandatory minimum, you'd think really seriously about taking anything where you could go home. If you have a wife and kids at home, or even if you don't, you want to go home to your family. And so they make these extraordinary, draconian charges. And that's what they seem to have done with Baldwin right now. One count carries a 5-year mandatory minimum. On the other one, you could get up to 18 months. You can see what they're telling him, right, Mark? They're telling him, take the one where you could get 18 months, make the best argument you can. You won't get a lot of jail time, and plead guilty, because that's the only way we'll drop the 5-year mandatory count. He's got very good lawyers. He's vigorously fighting the case. In addition to that, the armorer was charged. The armorer also has counsel. No one's going to be arrested in the case. For the moment, there's a summons. That's obviously the right thing to do. They didn't drag, Alec Baldwin to New Mexico State Court and perp walk him around, which is what New York is sometimes famous for in their state court system. But I just think that he's overcharged. I think it's a tragedy. The widower, the cinematographer's husband, agreed to be the executive producer of Rust. They're still trying to make Rust. Supposedly. It just is a tragedy. I think that, obviously there's that you can't bring a person back. It's just a terrible, awful tragedy. It is not a criminal case David, for someone to get 5 years in prison.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, though, and this is a legit, just curiosity, because we were kicking it around knowing that we were going to have a chance to chat with you. And I was saying, I guess it's tough, though. Someone was killed on the set. Does everybody just go, well, it was accidents happen, pretty tough spot? I mean, it's almost as though it maybe, and this is what I'm getting from this conversation. Well, there was a settlement made with the her spouse. After that, you just can't bring a case. I guess what I'm asking is there a societal imperative, to hold people responsible, even if it was an accident? Maybe that would, and is that played out in the law?
I think the armorer, whose job it is to make sure that there's no live ammunition, is properly charged. I wouldn't have charged her with the 5-year count. I would have charged her with the 18-month in prison possibility count and let her have a fair fight. I'm just saying it puts an enormous, sword of Damocles over your head to charge you with a 5-year mandatory count. I mean, what rational person wouldn't do almost anything, including plead guilty? In federal court, you have to stand up there and say, I really, really am guilty, and lay a factual basis. In a lot of state courts, you can say, my lawyer told me that this was the best thing for me. And then the person can go right outside and tell the press, I'm totally not guilty. I didn't do anything wrong. My lawyer just explained to me that, I was going to go to jail for a long time and I wanted to go home with my family. That's not very satisfying. You talk about a societal imperative. How about to prove that there was really guilt? Now, if you were going to be the prosecutor on this case, a couple of things that they have on their side, they say that that there's an industry standard of shaking the ammunition. And if you actually shake the dummy bullet, because it doesn't have gunpowder in it, it will sound different, right? It won't make that gunpowder inside sound. And so every single bullet should be shaken. And if you're the actor, whether it's your job or not, whether it's your duty or not, you should take the extra precaution. But I think that Baldwin will have witnesses who'll say, I made a Western, I shot a gun in the Western, and I did not shake or see anybody shake it. That's somebody else's job to go shake every dummy bullet that I shoot and they shoot these scenes over and over again. So I don't know if they're going to be able to prove, again, beyond a reasonable doubt that he did something wrong there. They say the other thing is that he doesn't recall pulling the trigger. He thinks he just pulled the hammer back in some way that made the gun go off. An FBI expert has examined it. That's apparently what they've been doing for many of the last few months, having this expert examination done. And an FBI expert's prepared to say that, no, the trigger was pulled. But, this all happens so fast. If they're going to try to prove Alec Baldwin guilty because he misremembered that, it's an important detail, but that he misremembered that, to me, it just doesn't add up. And as to your question, Mark, that terrible accidents happen, terrible accidents happen. I don't know. You're too young to remember the Twilight Zone case, but that was one of the big cases back in the 80s. And some people died in shooting the Twilight Zone. I think some people were convicted. Some people were acquitted. It was a terrible accident with a helicopter. They said that, well, the producer or the director was trying to sort of do it too fast, should have taken more precautions. I get that. You're dealing with a helicopter, right? You're dealing with how fast you do something. But I just don't see where Alec Baldwin himself cut corners or did something that he shouldn't have. I don't see where there's criminal liability. They say it's involuntary, which means that he didn't mean for anybody to get hurt. Somebody did. That's the manslaughter. But the involuntary is a kind of negligence. And I guess some people would say not shaking that every single dummy bullet to make sure it's a dummy bullet. They say he shouldn't have pointed the gun where he pointed the gun, but I believe the director and the cinematographer told him exactly where to point the gun and how to play that scene. And he played the scene the way he was told to play it. And he didn't do anything wrong, except someone, not him, hadn't properly checked that it was a dummy bullet and not a live bullet that had gotten into the gun that he was using in the scene.
All right, now I'm down to my last 45 seconds. Give me those 45 seconds on the expunging of impeachment for Donald Trump. One of the things the GOP is talking about, particularly the Trump acolytes, the Matt Gaetzes of the world, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, is we want to really just clean the record of these the show trials that were the impeachment trials of Donald Trump. So I wonder if you could speak to that, and you only have a second to do it, please.
Well, this kook squad that was able to twist McCarthy's arm, right, and get all of these committee assignments, which are really madness, the idea of them being on some of these committees, this kook squad and all of the irrelevant investigations and crazy things they're going to come up with. But one of the other things that they're demanding is to expunge, like Trump were a common criminal who wanted to get a job, at a 7-Eleven, and he didn't want it to show up on his rap sheet, that he had this offense or that offense. The idea of an expungement, I said the other day with Pat Thurston, this is like Stalin trying to erase history. The man was impeached twice. He also had a brilliant trial put on by Adam Schiff, as people will recall, and everyone thought it was brilliant and compelling, except, of course, the Republican senators who were too scared to vote, Trump out of office. And then even the January 6th insurrection, that was the second impeachment, they wouldn't vote 2/3 of them to convict. Some of them did vote to convict him. Remember that, the Republican senators, because their own lives had been held hostage. They had themselves been taken hostage that day. So that got some of them thinking, like McConnell, that, hey, maybe Trump did something very, very wrong that day. But the idea of expunging it is totally symbolic and fanciful, and it doesn't mean anything at all, except, it's symbolic. It's, they're going to love to, bandy that about as though it were real. Trump will be the only president who ever got impeached and tried in the Senate twice. And I guess he'll be the only one who got this crazy expungement, because even later after that, some of his base just wouldn't let it go. They just would. I mean, January 6th, they're going to expunge that. January 6th, in my opinion, you ought to be prosecuted for, ex-president or not, prosecuted for in federal court by Merrick Garland.
Well, you state the case so well, but I mean, it is a because it's not a court of law and you have these people who are politically motivated, you have all of these various political motivations that are leading to various decisions that are being made. But you state the case so well, David. The point is it's a fool's errand, though. You won't get expungement is the bottom line on it, isn't it? It's all performative.
It's all performative. It's all a fool's errand because the history is what the history is. You know, this happened to the man on the $20 bill, Andrew Jackson, still on the $20 bill. He's about to have Harriet Tubman, I think, either in place of him or on the other side of him. But Jackson was himself impeached, and he himself got an expungement. So somebody has read their history and said, well, if Andrew Jackson, the man from the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee Indians, if he could get an expungement, Trump could get an expungement. And all I can say is Trump's in good company with Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears in my book.
No, it's right. Andrew Jackson is a despicable president. I've said it before on this show. I can't believe he's on the $20 bill. It makes me sick. I'd rather have Beyonce on the $20 bill than Andrew Jackson. But
Mark, I would say this. All of your viewers who agree with you should send you their 20s. Like the gypsy, right? The gypsy who says, give me your 20, I'll commit it. Send your 20 to Mark Thompson because he was a despicable figure on your bill.
That's exactly right. Get rid of those Jacksons. He's the former assistant U.S. attorney. You can see him on Twitter at David Katz Law. He is the great David Katz. Joins us on Thursday. Thank you, David.
Great to be with you.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.